The hardest special event in iRacing is just around the corner, and I thought I would just guide you through a lap of the Nordschleife to make sure that you get through the absolute hell and chaos that is the iRacing 24 Hours of Nürburgring. Now this lap right has been done on the iRacing Nürburgring setup, so it's something that everyone can access just through the iRacing setup menu and going into iRacing setups. The lap time is an 8:11. Let's jump into it. So since Nordschleife is a very long lap, I will be going into details in the important sections, and other sections will just be going over quickly. So into the first corner, we aim to brake around the 100-meter board. Now this corner you don't want to carry too much speed into because the track instantly flicks to the left after, which you can see we're down to first gear, down to 60 kilometers an hour, so we really don't have a lot of speed, but we want to make sure we get a pretty decent exit out of here. You can see we go through the gears to this next section, we brake just as these cones end, down to third gear, carry some decent speed through here, but once again the track goes to the other side instantly after, so we want to make sure we don't carry too much speed through the first part. I also want to make sure we don't carry too much speed through the second part, because that will give us a bad exit out here. So down to second gear, apply the throttle like decently early. You can see there's a bit of runoff area that we can use on the exit as well. And coming down to the hairpin, you can see just on the entry we use this little bit of extra tarmac there as well. Now here it's important actually that you sort of in the braking zone, you sort of aim towards the apex. You sort of brake tightly towards the inside, like you can see I do here, and that's because the track actually cambers on the inside, so you will find more grip on the inside even though you're actually traveling a shorter distance and putting the car under more stress. You can see we're sort of taking it towards the inside, and then as we're sort of at the middle of the corner, we take it a little bit wide, and then we come back in at the exit to sort of get an explosive and really good exit. This is sort of the fastest way I found to take this corner pretty much in any situation. Up to the Schumacher, as you can see, we lift a little bit on the entry, and that's because it isn't quite flat out, at least when you're on race fuel, and we just want to make sure we avoid the slowdown there as well if you use a bit too much track. Down to the next corner, another one of those where you first go to the left or to the right, and then right after that you go to the other side. So once again, in the first corner here, you want to make sure that you don't carry too much speed, because you've got a corner going to the other side where you want to get a good exit. You can see we use the track on the entry, we use the track on the apex as well, but we don't use the track on the exit of the first one. That's because we're flicking it over to the left side, and then we're making sure that we hit the apex here. You can see how early I really am on throttle. If you look at the very top of the screen, I'm already on throttle at the apex way before I get to the exit. You see I'm really explosively on the throttle as well, and from this point on I'm just keeping it pinned, and that's how we get a good exit out of that corner. Now coming to the end of the GP section, we've got a little chicane coming up. Now in general, what you want to remember is that you don't want to overdrive the car in the GP section, because if you overdrive the car in the GP section, your tires will not be great for when you get to the Nürburgring Nordschleife, which is where you're really putting the tires under stress, because there's always a corner there basically. Now down towards the last chicane on the GP section, we brake at the 50-meter board, we take it down to third gear, and we just make sure to avoid the off track here as well. I mean, we don't want to get DQ'd at this race, can we agree? And I think it's only like 50 incident points for this race, so good luck with that, lads. Now right after the chicane, we keep the car sort of to the right side, and that's because we are exiting the GP section and we're going on to the Nordschleife. So this is where all hell breaks loose, and this is where you really need to concentrate, because there's not a lot of room for failure on the Nordschleife. Taking it down to second gear in this corner, you can see my throttle input at the very top is quite smooth, and that's because this corner is actually pretty bumpy, and even in a GT3 car that has traction control, like the Porsche GT3, if you're too aggressively on the throttle, it would actually wheel spin out of this corner, which will just overheat the tires and it'll cost you lap time. As we come down towards the first corner on the Nordschleife, you can see we take it a little bit wide on the entry, down to second gear, and here we just make sure to get early on throttle as well. It's a pretty simple corner, it's pretty straightforward. Coming down towards Hatzenbach, excuse me if I butchered that. I mean, we have a video the other day on how to pronounce the Nordschleife corners correctly, so make sure to watch that if you haven't. So coming through Hatzenbach, this should be easily flat out, no matter whether you're on race fuel or quali fuel, shouldn't be a problem. The next section here is quite tricky actually. It's a pretty technical section, and one corner always leads to another through this section. So you can see we brake at this where the sort of white graffiti on the asphalt ends. We brake down to third gear, we stay away from the first curb, that one just bounces your way. But from here on out, we take the second curb, you can see We're trail braking it all the way to the apex as well, and that is just to make sure we also get the rotation out of it. Now here I actually see a lot of people taking it really tightly, a bit too tightly actually. What you can do is you can carry a bit more speed through the first part, you can go a bit wider, and you can see what I then do is I use this curb here as well. I see a lot of people avoiding this curb, but I have no issues with this curb personally. So I go over this curb, we stay in third gear, use this curb here as well. You can see I have more than half of the car over this curb. Next curb as well, we use that curb as well, and on top of that we use the exit curb too, so there's a lot of curb usage. Now for the final corner of this section, we go down to second gear. We just make sure to get a good and explosive exit here. That's because we have a long stretch of flat out racetrack coming up, so we want to make sure to get a good exit here. Next up is the famous Flugplatz. You all know this one, and basically the naming explains it all. Flugplatz means what? I think it means like airport or something. That's because of the entry to the corner right here, you actually go airborne, so you want to make sure you keep the car straight. If not, I don't know, you'll probably flip off into a wall or something, which you don't want. On the entry to the corner, you can see I just slightly lift off, and that's also to make sure that we don't understeer off on the exit. It is a very, very fast corner, so you don't have a lot of time to react if you're carrying a bit too much speed. So we lift off a little bit. You can see we go for the first apex, second apex as well. Another very fast section of small kinks coming up, so just make sure to keep your eyes on the track at this point. Now we're coming up to Schwedenkreuz, which is a corner where we want to lift for. So you can see on the entry to the corner, there is this little whiteboard. This is where I sort of aim to get my car turned in, and I also lift off a bit, so make sure you look at the throttle. You can see I'm lifting off almost fully, applying the throttle a little bit again before we brake, and this is just to make sure as well that we're on the left side of the track by the time we brake. You can see I brake about 70%, 75% into this hairpin corner, and here you want to make sure that you get a good exit as well, because there's another bunch of fast speed kinks coming up that you're just basically doing flat out. As you're coming through this compression here, where there's going to be a lot of downwards G's in real life, you come up to one of the fastest and most sketchy corners on the track, I would say. Another whiteboard on the entry to the corner, as you can see, right out here. So this is what we sort of use as our braking point and as our turning point. You can see I'm just slightly tapping the brakes, and I'm just gearing down to fifth gear, absolutely mounting this curb on the inside. Now, you really want to be careful with this one, because if you just mount it a bit too much, it will spit you straight off into the wall. So once again here, you can easily back off a tenth or two just to make sure that you actually survive. Remember, the Nordschleife is probably one of the hardest events to survive in the whole world, so you just want to make sure that you do that instead of necessarily pushing for every single little tenth, right? You can see we go down through the gears while we break down to fourth, down to third, and as we come into the slow section here, you can see we go down to second, and at this point we're braking, sort of trying to get the car turned in, and I actually go all the way down to first. Now you can take this in second, I just prefer to take it down to first just to get that little extra kickoff rotation on the entry to the corner. Now for these slow corners, you want to make sure you stay off the curb, because they are big, so stay away from them. Now for the next corner, we're actually just lifting a little bit. You can see I'm slightly on the brakes through the corner just to make sure that we have the front end with us. For the next corner, we are just taking a late apex down to second gear, and that's because, so it actually looks like a 90-degree corner when you're approaching it, but when you actually get to it, it's actually in reality more like a 120-degree corner. You just want to make sure that you've considered that while you're entering the corner. We take a late apex for that, avoid this next curb over here. We just make it to third gear. Now we come down to one of the corners where Kevin Estra pulled off one of the craziest moves in one of his Nürburgring races. It's a downhill braking zone, so you want to make sure you don't brake too late, and you just sort of get to the apex curb pretty early, and then you just want to sort of follow around. Now where you want to make sure that you're at the apex curb is very late here. You want to make sure that you're at the curb here, so whether you take a wide entry before that or a tight entry before that won't make the biggest difference. Just make sure that you're here so you can get a good exit and use this exit curb. Next up, we have a flat out corner, and then we'll come up to miss hit miss. So this is basically in the corner name, or it's called miss hit miss, because what you want to do is you want to sort of miss the first apex, then you go and hit the second apex, and then you can drift out wide and miss the last apex as well. This is the fastest way to go through this corner. It is a fourth gear corner. You just want to make sure that you also keep it stable and that you don't carry too much speed, because it's like a mid-speed corner. You don't have all the downforce in the world, but you also are carrying a pretty decent speed, so make sure you don't spin it or lose it or understeer it in there as well. And down to one of the slowest and probably also one of the trickiest corners on the track. So you're approaching a very slow speed corner in a downhill braking zone that's also turning at the same time. So the most important thing here is probably that you don't apply too much brake pressure, because what will happen is that you will trigger the ABS. You'll end up not having as much braking power. You'll end up just overusing your tires as well. So don't brake too much. A good smooth throttle input here is also really important, because you are in very low speed, so the car won't have the crazy start of traction. So just make sure that you're smoothly on throttle out of this corner as well. Next up, we don't have the trickiest corner. You can see our braking point is just as this curb ends. We take it down to third gear and we just kind of roll it a bit through. Apply the throttle again. Next corner as well, we keep it in third gear. Here you want to make sure you get a pretty good exit out of here as well, because there's a bit of a straight coming up, and you can see I am on the throttle before the apex of the corner. This is an incredibly important corner. There is one of the longest straights on the Nordschleife apart from the back straight coming up, and you want to make sure you get a powerful exit out of it. Now, what makes it really tricky is that you can actually not see the whole corner. It's a very long corner, and also it just keeps on going forever basically. But you want to make sure that your apex is placed very, very late. You can see I'm apexing very, very late for this corner, and that's just to make sure I can get a really good exit. You can see how early I'm on throttle. I'm on throttle before I can even see the exit of the corner. Now, a long straight coming up. This is where you can maybe get an overtake done with enough slipstream if you're lucky, if you were close enough. I wouldn't recommend going side by side into the next corner though, because this is a really, really fast wall. You want to make sure that you don't go too wide here. If you just put your rear wheels onto the grass, for example, on the exit, around you go, and guess what? On the Nordschleife, there's not really any runoff, so you'll just head straight towards the wall, and that'll be your race over. Next up, a little flat out corner before a braking zone. You can see I actually brake sort of towards the left hand side. This is a hairpin in second gear. We sort of keep it tight to the inside until we get to the exit. That's because it's also a tight corner. Now, coming to the carousel. You all know this corner. Probably one of the most, if not the most famous corner on the Nordschleife, because it is super, super unique. There's only one line through this corner. You can see the braking point on the entry to this corner. There's basically a point where this curb sticks out. You can see it right here actually, where it sort of changes direction. That's our braking point for the carousel, down to second gear, and we just drop into it. You can see I'm trail braking until I realize that I've shaven off enough speed. Now, from here on out, it's important actually to keep just a little bit of throttle on it, and that's just to keep the speed up. So you can see my throttle inputs are sort of adjusted through the whole thing. And then when I realized that, okay, we're getting towards the end of the carousel, you can see I stomp down the throttle and I get a good exit out of here. Now we approach probably my favorite part of the Nordschleife. It has such a good flow. This first part is flat out, and now we come up to, I believe this corner is called the Whipperman. This is a fun corner. You can see on the entry we just tap the brakes here down to fourth gear, a slight throttle load in the middle of them, and then we take it down to third gear for this next one. Now here as well, you can see there is not a lot of space on the outside. If you mount this curb a bit too much, you can actually end up bottoming out. So don't carry too much speed through this part of the track. It is very, very sketchy if you do, and we're braking anyway, so it's not like you need a good exit out of there anyways. So we're braking here again a little bit, staying in third gear, and once again on throttle. Now here comes a downhill section where a lot of people actually carry too much speed. So you can see for the first kink here, we lift off a bit. And at this point, I actually tap the brakes, take it down a gear. I mount this curb, and you see I actually follow this curb all the way till here. So I'm mounting it still at this point. And at this point, I'm also throttling up, and that's because we're changing direction over this next curb. And here, we sort of use the curb on the exit as well. This is probably one of the most satisfying corners, in my opinion, on this whole track. Next up, we have another little braking zone down to third gear. Now, the guys at the Nürburgring were kind enough to sort of leave us another kind of braking point. You can see as this one sort of starts to go out of frame, this little Yokohama sign, we start tapping the brakes. We stay in third gear still. This whole section here is third gear. Now, this is probably the easiest corner on the Nordschleife to get an off track in, because if you use a bit too much track, if you put the middle of the car over the curb, you'll get a 1x in this corner. You want to avoid that, especially for qualifying, because then your lap won't count. Probably the easiest place, so just make sure you don't go too wide here. Next up is the YouTube corner. You all know this one. There are so many compilation videos from this exact corner. So on the entry, just as the curb ends, we are on the brakes about 50%, just there under, trail braking and keeping it in third gear, applying the throttle, and then using the track on the exit as well. YouTube corner is actually a decently straightforward corner. What's important is that you just once again modulate the throttle and make sure that you don't throttle up too early. If you throttle up too early, you know, you'll end up in the grass, and that's where you'll end up in one of these highlight videos, compilation videos, or whatever they're called, and someone will laugh at you. Now, after you've survived public humiliation in the YouTube corner, we break down to second gear for this next corner. You can see I'm really getting quite early on throttle, and that's because at this point we're actually heading uphill, sort of in a compression kind of style. So we actually have a decent amount of grip on the exit here. On top of that, we're mounting the curb on the exit, and from here on out, we're just keeping it flat out through these kinks. Now we're approaching the jump, which is called the jump for a reason. It's because you're airborne in this corner. Now you just want to make sure that you don't really have any inputs while you're airborne, because I have seen circumstances where braking can sort of get the front end too much down into the floor. So I just make sure to not really have any inputs while for the short moment you're airborne, and then right as I land, you can see I get on the brakes and change down a gear to fourth. Very quick section here. You just want to make sure you're not carrying too much speed. You want to make sure you're sort of keeping it to the right side, because you're changing to the left side of the track. Now here you want to avoid the curbs as well, because this one will basically be certain death. Now you can see we're kind of in the middle of the track, and that's because we're going to the left, and from here on out I'm just keeping it flat out. Now you need to be pretty precise here, because the track is not necessarily wide. Once again, here, keeping it flat out here. If you mount this curb on the inside, you will go airborne. You could probably survive that one, but you'll still go very airborne. Like, I've got a couple pictures of just an absolute takeoff. Up to this next section, you can see we break down to fourth gear, and we're actually trying to keep it to the right side of the track so we can get a better line through this corner. Third gear through here, and actually the track sort of drops off a bit here. Carousel 2.0, this one is not that difficult. You can see we drop into it in second gear, and we just stay low as we sort of get on the exit. Full throttle. There's not really anything crazy about it. Now the last corner onto the straight is really quite important as well, that you get a phenomenal exit here. So you can see just on the entry, we're just lifting off for a bit, tapping the brakes a bit, and you can see I'm just making sure that I get to this second curb. So it's sort of, you hit the first apex, you drift that wide, and then you come back in again and make sure that you get a solid exit onto the Dottinger. And this is probably the most important exit on the whole track, because you're going on to probably the longest straight in the world. I'm not sure about this, but it's certainly long enough that you could pull up your favorite TV show, watch maybe 3 or 4 episodes before you get to the end of it. So after you've spent the whole Dottinger her reading 3 novels, by the time you get to the end, you have one more braking zone before you finish off the lap. Now this one's actually quite funny. So you're approaching here, and just as this curb on the right ends, we want to brake, and we change down the gears. Now right here, when this wall is here, you can see I actually release the brakes as well, and then I get back onto them, and that's because there is a bump there which we want to avoid having too much brake pressure on as well. We take the final curb, get a good exit, get close to the wall, and that right there, ladies and gentlemen, is a lap around the Nordschleife. If you found this video helpful, make sure to subscribe to Overtake GG. I wish you the best of luck for the Nürburgring 24 hours. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.